Long time no see. This is YouTube Medical University. Despite resting a lot lately, I can't shake this fatigue. I can't maintain my concentration and I'm making more simple mistakes. Is it because I lack motivation, or is it that I just can't get motivated to do anything? Have you ever felt this way? Today's topic is brain fatigue. Based on the latest scientific findings, I want to shed light on your prolonged discomfort. If you're feeling even a little bit tired right now, please make sure to watch this video until the end. Let me share a very important fact with you right at the beginning. According to the latest findings, the fatigue you feel, what you perceive as tiredness, is actually completely different from the fatigue that accumulates as real damage in your body. This is research that a certain research team reported in an international academic journal. They measured the sense of fatigue and actual fatigue in esports players while they were playing games. Then, the sense of fatigue, or simply feeling tired, actually stayed about the same for about 3 hours after starting the game. However, the brain's slower decision-making speed, or fatigue, according to research, the ability to make decisions actually started to gradually decline after about an hour, and after 2 hours, it had clearly worsened. In other words, when you play a game for 3 hours straight and feel tired after 3 hours, your brain is actually already fatigued before you even notice it, and after 2 hours, your decision-making and reaction speed have already started to decline. Tests revealed performance had begun declining, with clear reductions in brain function. And this phenomenon was seen not only in professionals but also showed the same trend in beginners. I believe this is something lurking in modern society. I think this is the terrifying aspect of brain fatigue. When you feel tired, your brain performance has already been declining for an hour. Even if you think you're still okay, even if you think you can concentrate, your work quality is dropping, leading to mistakes in key situations and possible regret. These kinds of things can happen. If you wait to rest until you feel tired, it's already too late. In the first period, we'll talk about what we've been overlooking. I'll introduce the SOS signs from your body that appear before you even feel fatigue. In the second period, we'll discuss substances causing brain fatigue found in recent research, and I'll introduce the components that are attracting attention for recovering from that fatigue. Then, in the third period, we'll get even more specific and discuss a certain vitamin called Fursultiamine, which may be very important for recovering from brain fatigue and boosting motivation. That's what recent findings suggest, so I'll introduce that to you from a doctor's perspective based on the data. As a bonus, I'll share what drinks and breakfast choices can help reduce brain fatigue starting tomorrow instead of using caffeine at the end of the video. I'd like to share my thoughts from a doctor's perspective. Please watch until the end. So first, in the first period, I'll talk about things you can't notice yourself. How can you tell if your brain is tired? I'll introduce some surprising SOS signals your body sends you. Have you heard of a disease called chronic fatigue syndrome? This is a real illness. Persistent fatigue for months causes reduced concentration. Fatigue builds up, making movement hard. There are many patients who, because of this illness, find it difficult to even work or go about their daily lives. The onset of this illness is believed to be caused by things like this. When you don't realize you're feeling fatigued and think, I'm fine, I'm not tired, it makes you push yourself too hard. If you rely solely on willpower and determination, your brain will eventually hit its limit and your performance will suddenly drop. So, what kind of signs does your body show before you actually feel tired? I'll introduce 2 surprising signs. In a study at Tsukuba University, they examined the pupils of people who played esports for long periods of time. That's the black part of the eye. They found that when you use your brain for long periods like this, it has been scientifically revealed that people who do this kind of mental work have pupils that are slightly constricted. Medically, what this means is that when the activity of the noradrenaline system, which maintains brain arousal and excitement, decreases, the pupils start to constrict. In other words, it was found that before you feel fatigue, the noradrenaline system decreases and pupil constriction begins. And in this study, it was actually found that the more a person's pupils constricted, the slower their decision-making became and the more mistakes they made. Rather than whether the person themselves feels tired or not, the size of the pupils actually reflected brain fatigue more accurately. In other words, signs from the body appear before you even feel fatigue. I think this is a very interesting example, and that's not all. As a second unexpected sign, actually there's also coldness in the tip of the nose or fingertips. This is another interesting study, but when people did mental work like playing games for 3 hours, thermography showed that the temperature of the tip of the nose and fingertips clearly dropped. That's a fascinating result. Some studies report that the temperature dropped by nearly 2 degrees. The reason this happens is that when people are under mental stress or feeling tense, the sympathetic nervous system becomes active, and actually, the blood vessels at the extremities, like the tip of the nose and fingertips, start to constrict. When you're actually tired and feel like your mind isn't working, haven't you ever noticed that your fingertips feel cold? That might not be because it's cold, but possibly your brain is under too much strain and is too tired, and that's the signal it's sending you. Remembering these reasons helps you notice your body's signals more easily, which is why I'm mentioning it. By the way, why do fingertip blood vessels constrict when your sympathetic nervous system is activated? For example, this system responds when you face large animals like bears. It's easier to understand if you think about how humans react when facing them. For example, when you come face to face with a bear and need to run away, our bodies adjust to concentrate blood flow to the muscles and heart so we can move at full capacity. At times like that, it's not important for blood to reach your fingertips or the tip of your nose. To efficiently direct blood flow to key areas, the peripheral blood vessels constrict, and when your heart starts pounding, it's because your heart is working hard to send blood throughout your muscles. It's easier to understand if you think about the reasons behind it, right? So, in order to notice if your brain function is declining before you start feeling tired, it might be difficult to measure your own pupils, but how about checking if your fingertips or the tip of your nose are getting cold? Please try it out and see how you feel. If you have tips or signs, please share them in the comments to help others. Even if you can detect brain fatigue, I think many people wonder what they should actually do about it. So, in the second part, recent research has revealed that a certain fatigue substance in the brain actually puts the brakes on brain function. It's a very interesting topic, so while introducing this, I'll also talk medically about what nutrients are needed to prevent those brakes from being applied. First, let me share some surprising facts. How much energy does our brain actually use? The weight of our brain is only about 2% of our body weight. However, out of all the energy we consume, it's said that about 20% is used by the brain. This is said to be almost the same amount of energy used by all the muscles and the liver in the body. I think you can see that it's a very high-cost organ. However, while it may seem high cost, actually, compared to a computer, it's been found to perform calculations very efficiently. It's said that the brain can perform complex calculations that would require 2 million watts on a supercomputer using only about 20 watts, which is about the same as a small light bulb. In other words, in terms of the body's total energy, the brain is very high cost, but compared to machines, it's actually extremely energy efficient and performs very precise calculations. That's one of the unique features of the brain. Do you understand so far? However, if the brain consumes too much energy, it will take away all the energy that the rest of the body needs to use. That's a possibility, right? So, it's been found that the brain has a braking mechanism to prevent it from overworking and putting the body at risk. That substance is actually lactic acid. When the brain is overused and it's dangerous to keep it active, lactic acid is produced in the brain, and it turns out that this lactic acid itself acts as a braking signal telling the brain to stop its activity. In a rat experiment, 2 hours of intense exercise reduced brain energy storage. It was found that the glycogen in the brain was consumed by as much as 60% in some areas. And interestingly, when the brain reaches a point where any further consumption would deplete its energy and cause damage, it uses a braking signal called lactate. It has been found that the brain intentionally lowers its activity. If the brain continues to function beyond this point, it will run out of energy and the cells will be in danger. Lactate acts as a safety mechanism to prevent this, which many thought was only linked to exercise, making this a notable discovery. Thus, supplying the brain with energy is important to avoid triggering lactate's braking signal. Now let's move to the second period's main topic. How do you think think we can maintain high energy efficiency, prevent fatigue from accumulating in the brain, and avoid producing unnecessary lactate as a brake. What becomes important here is a substance called vitamin B1. Our bodies use carbohydrates we eat and oxygen we take in through our lungs to produce energy, and the main source of this energy is a substance called adenosine triphosphate. Think of it as the currency of energy. This adenosine triphosphate also helps repair cells that are extremely fatigued. As an essential coenzyme needed to produce adenosine triphosphate, which is the currency of energy, actually this vitamin B1 is absolutely necessary. If you lack vitamin B1 carbohydrates, and even if you get energy, without the coenzyme your metabolism fails, adenosine triphosphate isn't made and your brain hits its limit. So, that's why your body starts producing lactic acid, and your brain begins to hit the brakes. You're starting to understand, right? And after your brain starts to hit the brakes, about an hour later, you start to feel tired and experience fatigue. In other words, vitamin B1 is extremely important not only for producing energy, but also for preventing the excessive production of lactic acid, which acts as a brake on your brain. In other words, if you lack vitamin B1, you can't use energy and you'll run out of fuel, and on top of that, your brain function will keep declining. So it's a problem in both ways. And it's also been found that this is related to motivation. There are probably people who don't really feel tired but just can't seem to get motivated. In those cases, it might be because dopamine in your brain, which drives motivation, there may not be enough of that hormone. When you hear dopamine, you might just think of it as a pleasure chemical or something risky. And I think a lot of people might feel that way. But actually, it's one of the most important hormones for turning on your motivation switch. When you exercise, you might think something good could happen, or when you study, you might think it could lead to success in the future. Those kinds of thoughts about the future. Dopamine is what controls our expectations and motivation, and because it works properly, we're able to pursue our goals and live each day with enthusiasm. And interestingly, dopamine also relies on the coenzyme we mentioned earlier, vitamin B1, specifically a derivative of vitamin B1. We've learned more about its link to fursultiamine. This is a review from the second lecture. Actually, lactic acid in the brain acts as a brake that reduces brain function. And I explained that in order to prevent these from occurring, it's important not only to get proper nutrition, but also to take in the nutrient called vitamin B1. And not only that, but also the motivation substance. I also explained that in order to produce dopamine, a special substance called fursultiamine, which is a unique form of vitamin B1, is deeply involved. So, in the third period, I will explain about the noteworthy substance fursultiamine, and at the end of the video, I would like to talk about what kinds of drinks and foods are actually recommended. I mentioned that the brain only makes up about 2% of our body weight, but it consumes about 20% of our body's energy. However, in modern times, it actually consumes even more. That's possible. There's some interesting data on this. The amount of information people receive in a single day has increased explosively in recent years. According to one theory, the amount of information a person in the 17th century would acquire over their entire lifetime is now consumed by modern people in just 23 days. The real problem is, of course, smartphones. Smartphones. All kinds of notifications go off. When a notification goes off, dopamine is released in our brains, making us expect that there might be some interesting message, and before we know it, we end up glued to our smartphones. And these kinds of notifications take away our concentration. You pick up your smartphone to look something up, but before you know it, you've been surfing the web for 30 minutes. Haven't you ever had that experience? This might also be due to reduced decision-making or judgment, also known as brain fatigue. Have you experienced this? When you feel tired, how do you usually deal with it? Many people turn to things like coffee or energy drinks. A lot of people probably rely on caffeine. Of course, caffeine temporarily wakes up your brain, but it doesn't actually solve the brain's energy problem itself. In a way, it's like whipping your brain to force it to work. In contrast, what's getting attention now isn't temporary stimulation. The approach is to actually increase the brain's energy metabolism. In other words, the brain's energy currency called adenosine triphosphate itself. The substance that's now being looked at with high expectations for this approach is called fursultiamine. Let me talk about the weakness of a substance called vitamin B1 here. Vitamin B1 is known as a water-soluble vitamin. Since it's water soluble, meaning it dissolves in water, even if you try hard to take a lot of it, it gets excreted in your urine. So even if you take a large amount at once, your body can't store it. Fursultiamine is a type of vitamin B1. It's not exactly the same thing, but to overcome that weakness, it's designed to be fat soluble, meaning it dissolves in oil and is made to be easily stored in the body. Because of that, it's more easily absorbed in the body and can reach the brain more easily. That's the characteristic of fursultiamine, which is a vitamin B1 derivative. This is the vitamin B1 and motivation study I mentioned at the end of the second period. Conducted at Tsukuba University, researchers gave rats fursultiamine. As a result, the brain region responsible for motivation, it's the prefrontal cortex, and in this area, the amount of dopamine significantly increased. Furthermore, the rats with increased dopamine showed more spontaneous behavior and became more motivated, according to the study's conclusion. From these studies, it is suggested that fursultiamine, at least in rats, increases dopamine in the brain and may help lay the foundation for engaging in positive activities. This is different from forcing motivation with caffeine. It actually supports the brain's functions themselves. This approach is highly anticipated. What did you think? Although the content was a bit difficult, I hope that the vague term brain fatigue has become clearer and easier to understand. Many of the latest studies on vitamin B1 and related topics are being conducted at the University of Tsukuba and Alinamine Pharmaceutical, and there are many significant and fascinating studies, so I am personally very interested. If new research comes out, I definitely want to make another video about it. Brain fatigue is neither just your imagination nor simply a matter of willpower. It's a scientific phenomenon where low brain energy and substances like lactic acid slow brain activity. So finally, as measures you can take against brain fatigue starting today, I will briefly explain exercise, drinks, and meals from the perspective of brain fatigue and concentration. Here's the first step to fight brain fatigue you can start today. It's 1 minute of intense exercise. Most people think of 30 minutes a day when it comes to working out. We're often told to do about 30 minutes of aerobic exercise that gets us a little out of breath to help improve various illnesses, but it's hard to keep it up, isn't it? Actually, just doing 1 minute of high-intensity exercise increases the output from the brain to the muscles. This was found to help prevent that function's decline. There is research on this. In one study, people who played sports like soccer or basketball, the athletes were asked to do a very tough running program, 2 45-minute interval runs. Between the first and second runs, one group rested for only 15 minutes, and another group was asked to sprint at almost full speed for 1 minute during those 15 minutes. As a result, compared to the group that just rested, the group that sprinted for 1 minute was able to maintain their sprint performance better in the latter half. In other words, this data suggests that exercising for just 1 minute, rather than simply resting, can have an impact on your subsequent performance. It's tough to exercise for 30 minutes during a work break, right? But if you just try hard for 1 minute there, it might change the way you work in the afternoon. Your brain performance may improve. Here are ways to fight brain fatigue you can try today. Surprisingly, the second option is carbonated water, which I recommend for those sensitive to caffeine. A recent study found that esports players who drank unsweetened carbonated water for 3 hours outperformed those who drank plain water. They experienced less increase in fatigue and their decision-making speed didn't decline as much. Of course, this is just one small-scale study, but it seems that unsweetened carbonated water actually has this kind of potential. That fizzy feeling may stimulate your brain. There's hope for that. Here are ways to fight brain fatigue today. The third one is protein for breakfast. I've introduced this before in videos about blood sugar levels. I don't recommend just having sugar and heading to work because mornings are busy. This is also data from esports, but when esports players drink a beverage that contains protein rather than just a juice with only carbohydrates, it seems that their performance in the morning was easier to maintain. This is still just a small-scale study, but medically, from the perspective of blood sugar levels, protein is also filling and helps prevent rapid spikes in blood sugar. If your blood sugar rises rapidly, it can make you feel sleepy, and as your blood sugar drops sharply, it can cause weight gain or even increase the risk of hypoglycemia. For that reason, drinking protein in the morning is a habit I practice myself, so please give it a try. And there's another famous study in psychology. There's a study that shows when people look at a steep hill alone, it feels really tough, but when they look at it with a close friend, the hill appears less steep. Who you do a tough task with, especially when you're tired, can be very important. Connections with friends or positive relationships might actually reduce the fatigue you feel, but this is just about how you perceive things. It doesn't really address the problem itself. So, I just wanted to mention this as a bonus tip. How was it? This time I explained about brain fatigue. If you're feeling fatigued, that's already proof that your brain's performance is declining. I hope this video will be an opportunity for you to reflect on your brain and review your daily habits. It's suggested that it reaches the brain, supports energy production, and may also be involved with dopamine, which controls motivation. Fursultiamine, a derivative of vitamin B1. At YouTube Medical University, we are looking forward to following information about this substance. Please let us know in the comments about any substances you're interested in or actions you take to boost your motivation. At YouTube Medical University, we share easy to understand information based on scientific evidence from the perspective of practicing doctors so you can become healthier starting tomorrow. We're aiming for 1 million subscribers. I'd be happy if you could subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you in the next video. As a general practitioner, my patients have taught me how to avoid aging after 70. Ways of living. I want to live like this too. There are so many ways to live. This is filled with stories I've learned from many patients. Is chatting with friends more important than exercise? Is it better to subtract medications rather than add more? These are things I've learned from my seniors in life. It offers advice on healthy, happy living at any age. Check it out in the description below.